May 25th, 2006. And I have to remind myself that I've got to go into summertime mode because the thunderstorms are about. They've been about 7 months in coming, and you kind of get unused to doing anything about it. But I can see we've been missed twice real closely so far today and yesterday. So I've got to make preparations here. But if this program gets abrogated for whatever reason, mostly probably a power outage, we'll try to get back to it as best we can, and I've got to get myself some backup power. So at any rate, it is summertime. Things can get weird around here, and we've all been forewarned. We have with us today, again, Alan Watt. The website is Cutting Through the Matrix. The series that he's done is the Cutting Through series, a 3-volume work. That is available on the website. We'll talk more about that later. But I just want to welcome you, and thank you, really, for coming back, Alan.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yep.
All right. One thing we left not to do the last time you were on, and for good reason. It's probably one of the most, kind of wow type of topics you can discuss, and for obvious reasons to our listeners.
Mm-hmm.
But we can talk about, when you say the medieval culture and how we're manipulated, one of the elements has got to be, as much as we may like it, and that's rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, it's culture creation. Everything to do with music, drama, the arts is what's used to create or alter or update culture.
Would that necessarily mean, though, that everybody through the ages, to include, Sophocles and Shakespeare and all, were they all mind-opping people, or were at times they just telling a story for the sake of entertainment?
I don't think so. I mean, Plato talked about culture creation 2,300 years ago, and he went through the whole procedure. In fact, in ancient Greece, it was mandatory at one point that everybody attend the traveling theaters that came across the Middle East and in the Grecian areas. And even the slaves had to attend at least one performance. And he talked about this, and he said that that is where the women get their costumes and their fashion. He called it the fashion industry.
Mm-hmm.
And he said it's backed up by the drama, which teaches them certain morals or obedience to the system or the crown or the king.
Mm-hmm.
And he said then the music, which backs it up and affects the young and sets them into a certain mode of thinking and seeing things. So this science of culture creation has always been perfectly understood.
Well, you talked about in the Greek times of those plays,
Mm-hmm.
that people were compelled to go watch, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
All right, now, books come, books go. I can choose to read them or not. But when you do take a look at the pervasive role that television has played in one's home, even though people aren't compelled to watch what's going on, they really are kind of drawn to it. And again, here's a situation of like, well, they may not be dragged in to do it, but they do it to themselves. Would it be that the electronic culture, especially to include 24/7 television in one's home, people are really doing it to themselves?
In a sense, you see, people have always had a tremendous capacity for entertainment. This is a trait that we have naturally. It's innate. And it's well understood as a science, always has been. And interestingly, in the Soviet Union, actors and playwrights they called themselves the culture creators. They called themselves that openly. And when after 9/11, when the big hullabaloo came about with the Emmy Awards, I think it was the Emmy or Oscars or something, Susan Sarandon came forward, and she actually called herself we on behalf of the culture creation industry. So they're well aware of their role in this. And the communist system, interestingly enough, or the Soviet system, had departments of culture. Now, why would you need a department of culture if you and the people were the culture? You see? Now, not only that, the Western world and all the democratic countries, as they're called, including Canada, has a department of culture. So really, these guys give out grants to playwrights and musicians and artists to write along certain themes, politically correct themes, and they market them to the public via entertainment.
Well, since in the United States we don't have a department, at least governmentally, on the base, seems in charge with that, what do you think the surrogate is here?
Well, there's no doubt. You see, the CFR, which is the American branch of the Royal Institute of International Affairs, had a meeting, it was about a month-long meeting in Britain back in the late 60s. And the whole topic, the whole argument that we're having was which country should create the future global culture. Should it be left to the British industry, including they still had a sort of film industry at that time, a movie industry, or should it be Hollywood? And after the month was over, it was in the newspapers, they decided that Hollywood would basically create the culture for the world, backed up with the musical industry.
With regard to, I guess, one of the most popular groups ever, with regard to rock and roll, we look at the Beatles. Now, you're not the only individual, in fact, you're the only other one that I know of, and there may be more, who have identified a certain individual as being responsible for their meteoric rise, and also probably involved with one of the more notorious think tanks in the world, which is, I guess, Tavistock.
Tavistock and the Frankfurt Institute. The Frankfurt Institute is where Theodor Adorno, who was a master at music, he understood the complete science and psychology of music. He taught courses there. Frank Zappa took a course from him. And everybody who took the course came out as a superstar, heavily financed, heavily backed, singing particular types of music which really did affect teenagers at the time. And so again, this was one of the strategies they used. Theodor Adorno owned the musical rights of the Beatles up until he died. And
passed, do you know?
I can't remember exactly. I think it was the late 80s. Or maybe, probably the late 80s or mid-80s, because Paul McCartney put in a bid at the same time, so did Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson won, and he presently owns the rights of the Beatles. In fact, recently, it was in newspapers, because of some trouble he was in legally, he was talking about selling them, putting them back up for sale. So, yeah. Well,
it's going to be, I know that when I subscribed to this particular email group, Peter Myers out of Australia, and somebody was reviewing Coleman's Conspirators Hierarchy, and of course, Coleman, this is the first time I saw it. In fact, when you mentioned it, I thought back and going, okay, now Coleman said this is just the same individual, and I went back and looked in the book, and of course it was. He identifies Adorno as well.
Yeah.
But it's going to be very hard for people to believe that there could have been this subterfuge and him being behind the scenes, at least while the four were together. And yet, this individual, you claim beyond a reasonable doubt, did what he did, and I guess was probably pretty content not to have his name up in the limelight, eh?
Yeah, and in fact, that goes right along with what Professor Carroll Quigley said in Tragedy and Hope and the Anglo-American Establishment, the two big books he wrote, one on behalf of the CFR as a historian. And he said that there are movers and shakers behind the scenes who wield far more power than people who are elected, and they are content to know they're doing the great work, basically. That's the reward. Their financial reward is huge. They don't get the acclaim from the public, but they're left unmolested while the front men take the heat, basically. So that's standard, yeah.
I watched the criticisms of Coleman's book because of this one element. And a lot of them who were critical felt that because of this one item, that it completely, I guess, debunked his whole work. I mean, that's how much they couldn't believe it. Now, I can understand it. You know, I don't know how I felt when I first encountered it with Coleman. It seemed a little bit far out, but, you know, in this day and age, it doesn't mean it's wrong. However, let me ask you this, for people who were sitting there probably going, well, what about when they went on their solo careers? Was there a time when they were at least adept enough that if they went their separate ways, they were at that time at least musicians enough that they could carry their own careers?
Maybe after a while, and even a really long time, actually, after they split up. But, you see, basic logic has to be used, and guys who are coming up to their early 20s or their teenagers or 20s, don't write that kind of music. Three-chord wonders, that's the general guy at 18, 19, 20, 21. They don't know how to involve classical music into the mode of rock and roll. The minor keys, all the augmented chords which come in. These are much more advanced types of music that the general young guys don't know. It takes a lot of practice and years of experience to get there. Tempo changes in the middle of songs, and also the reflection. If you look at some of the words, what young person is going to sit and cry about yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. That's the sort of thing a much older person would write. So there's many, many clues if you just break it up.
Okay. Well, when you mentioned that Frankfurt was another one of the notorious think tanks, we're speaking about Germany over
here. Yeah.
Now, would that also have any kind of involvement with the fact that the Beatles seemed to get their teeth cut in Germany?
Yeah, well, it's possible. I never believed the build-up to these big groups. Supposedly they were playing just general run-of-the-mill stuff, rhythm and blues type stuff, very simple, and suddenly they come out with all this new stuff. They were given a clean-cut image with even suits to go with them, and the haircut, of course, so that even parents would accept them. And once they made enough hits and got a big, huge following, then they went off to India, and then came the rush of blending Christianity with Hinduism, which, strangely enough, is exactly what Theosophy said they would do in the late 1800s.
I know that, as the story goes, George Martin, their producer, had told them after, I guess, their first two albums, all right, guys, it's nice to do covers of R&B, but we got to start doing some stuff ourselves. I'm just wondering, did you ever hear of any information regarding, Martin and Adorno?
Not really, except I know that Adorno came over, and he was the head of the London Philharmonic Orchestra for a while, and a good friend of the Queen Elizabeth II. So he was in that same circle for sure, and they'd have to meet. It's impossible not to in that type of circle.
And Martin had a classical upbringing, did he not?
He did, yeah. But the master of classical, I've read Adorno, his books, and they are amazing for the depth of understanding of the psychology of music. It's probably the best written.
Now, do you not have a musician strain in you as well?
Oh, yeah. I've been up there, yeah.
All right, so at least when you talk about composition, you know from which you speak.
Oh, yeah, I know exactly what young guys can do. When you write in a certain type of pattern, you might say. It's like a fingerprint, and so you can always tell who's who by their fingerprints, and they can't jump from one fingerprint to another in a completely opposite direction and be just as good generally. Whereas you find with the Beatles, etc., there's tremendous classical influence and mixed up with the rock and roll, and yet even Paul McCartney admitted he never could write music.
Right.
Yeah.
Folks, if you wish to make a comment or ask a question, we can do that right now. I'll give you the information on how to do that with Alan as he's with us today for this hour. You can send an instant message via MSN to Vyzygoth, VYZYGOTH. If you're going to use Yahoo Messenger, there it's VYZ1400, Viz 1400. And I don't know if I've mentioned this on the air, but if you ever, click in to get into the buddy list or whatever it is, and you see the name Reg Dunlop, that's me. It's just a playful pseudonym I use. It's actually the name of Paul Newman's character in Slapshot. So, at any rate, don't be put off by that if that should ever come up. I got one email that said, "Is this really you?" But it is. Reg Dunlop, don't worry about it. That's Yahoo Viz 1400, not a problem. You can also send something via email at Vyzygoth@hotmail.com. As I said, we have Alan Watt with us. His website is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. He does have the three-part series, the Cutting Through series. Alan, do you have anything else coming up? Is anything else in the works that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, I'm making some DVDs up on the occult and going far deeper than the stuff that's been pushed out there to explain it in more detail, so you'll get an idea how it all fits together with science and psychology, and how we're manipulated through symbolism, which is a language, and our subconscious understands it. It programs us to an extent, and it also keeps us trapped in a way of thinking which blunts our ability to perceive beyond. It's deliberate, it's ancient, and it's all around us every day.
Yeah, there are no coincidences, are there?
There really are no coincidences at all. None. Zilch. But I was going to mention, too, that, see, the music industry is a business. People should understand that as well as being part of culture creation. Now, from the days of Plato mentioned that nothing comes from the grassroots. Nothing. So what he's telling you is that anything that did come from the grassroots, because it's not planned by the top, it could have unforeseen repercussions as it goes through, ripples through the system. So everything that's given to you in culture and authorized comes from the top down. And when you look at what happened in the 60s and 70s, when this explosion of pop, which is like Father, remember, pop, and rock is again the Masonic rock. That's where it comes from, like Rockefeller. You're looking at a planned explosion which was intended to totally alter the existing culture because it had done its job. Now that to go into the new phase of separating the youth from adults. And it was aimed directly at the young. And it's very interesting to notice that ever since, each generation as it grows up to the age of 22 will stick with the kind of music they get at their time. And they end up in old folks' homes and geriatric homes dancing to rock music. One day you'll see people dancing to rap. They don't go beyond. Now, the thing is, this was understood in the days of Beethoven, because Beethoven also was financed to do experimentations in theaters with certain types of disharmonic music. And they found with some of the disharmonics, it would cause anger and aggression in the audience, and even fights broke out with discordant notes and sounds. So this has been tried very, very well down through the ages. And then, of course, when they mixed the music with the standard drum beat and the heavy bass tempo, and then, of course, out came the LSD, which, the Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which was distributed throughout every university in Europe by the garbage bag full. It was thrown over university walls from limousines to get it all started. And this all came from the top. Yeah. And at the same time, out came the abortion clinics. They had the pill for women as well. It came out at the same time. They also had venereal disease clinics sprouted up for free. So all this was planned to coincide at the same time to destroy the old culture that had done its job and to bring in the new, which was, of course, the dissolution of the family.
Well, I guess our lives are somewhat parallel as far as age goes. And, certainly I got weaned on the Beatles, and at that time was kind of hold your hand stuff. I like you, you like me, let's go steady.
Yeah.
And, of course, through the 70s, it was the true cluster, you know what. And that really was kind of debasing if I think about it. Then as time goes on, I look at rap, and, I mean, I can't stand it, and I figure, well, it's because it's just not my music, my generation. But something tells me, and it's had a great staying power. It's over 20, almost 30 years now. And I'm saying to myself, how can that stay on the top of the hill when so many other genres come in and come out?
Yeah.
And, leave in 5 years. Now, is there an element also, and when you were talking about the discordance, where rap really gets to the brain more so than any of the music previous to it?
It does, and it also gets to a specific age group, more so than the previous ones. Because for someone over 25 to hear it for the first time, in fact, they'll shut off from it. They won't listen to the words. So it's directly meant to go into the minds of the very young. And of course, it's primarily violence and all this kind of stuff they're pushing. So this is deliberate. And rap See, the Masons, when they start off their lodge meeting, it's like a court. A court is a Masonic lodge, in fact. And the judge raps the gavel, the mallet, to begin and close the session. And that's called rap. You rap the bass. And this is the end of the music. You wrap it up. This is the end. That's as far as we're going. The next kind of man won't need music, in fact, if they get their way.
All right, we've got a lot to cover, and you tell me exactly what the truth is. I don't want to keep you over time, but if we do go a little over, could you brook that?
Sure. Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. To wrap up at least the rock and roll thing, we can admit that there seems to be something very strange that took place, especially through the late 60s and the 70s. There was a pretty big body count amongst rock and rollers.
Mm-hmm.
I know Alex Constantine has done some work about this, another individual by the name of Schimmel. Were any of these artists, and we can talk about Morrison and Hendrix and such, did any of them shake their handler's world or something like that to deserve the end they met, or was this just their own, incontinence?
Well, I've seen it. I've seen it how the business works. I tended to stay clear of contracts, which really helped me. For instance, I know the Bay City Rollers pretty well, and those guys still haven't got a penny from what they got. But what they did get was the usual stuff, including the women, which are shown at them. And when you're young and a young guy, that's very appealing. You can live in top hotels as long as you're on top of the world and having number ones. It isn't until later you start to ask where the money all is, and then you find out that it's been squandered by, or safely put away by your handlers, by your managers and agents. It's a tremendous rip-off business.
Do you think a lot of these individuals then, either wittingly or unwittingly, got kind of hooked up into a rock and roll servitude?
Oh yeah, no, there's no doubt about that. Now some of them that were really, they had a real impact on the young. Certainly were given extra money, had even their homes bought for them, for some of them, or estates even. They could really get to the young, and I've seen that happen too, just paid by their agents. They didn't even have to handle the money, the actual singers themselves, and they seldom saw the money. It wasn't until they really had to do something for themselves they went into their account and found out it's not there. But I've also seen stars being made and picked out of lineups.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah.
How about American Idol now? Is that bizarre or what?
Yeah, well, they got to occupy them with something, and that's really what they're. And it's almost like winning the lotto. The poor get the lotto, and it's the same idea.
Have you ever seen a particular network host this, though, and all the other networks just give it all this play? I mean,
yeah.
Today, I had to hide from the network news on, the alphabet because I just didn't want to see this stuff. I mean, leave me alone.
Yeah,
so when you see this kind of working together,
mm-hmm.
It kind of stinks. I mean, it smells of something.
It's highly manipulative. It also is a good safety valve for the young, because this is Generation X. The X means to be written off. You're flipping hamburgers and stacking shelves in Walmart. That's the Generation X. So they're giving them another form of escapism so that they can dream those years away rather than protest.
Yeah, and the use of the word idol, too, is very rich.
Idol is... well, the whole thing with the Hollywood,
mm-hmm.
and Holly is holy, and holy day. It all comes from the same root, and Hollywood casts the spell over the world. That's its job, and so that with the music, coupled with the music industry and much music, or Eminem, Master Mason, you find that they are filling the heads of the young with their drama, their fiction, and their downloading of new culture.
You share with me a pretty interesting anecdote, if you would share it with our listeners. I guess it came up as part of my asking you, why was Leonard popped in 1980? Was there something that he was about to say? And you recounted a time. Do you want to share that anecdote about when he sort of got woken up?
Well, Well, if you look at the Sgt. Pepper's album cover, supposedly on there it's all the favorite people in history of the Beatles, and they have, of course, you have the devil's sign there, given by, I think it was Lennon. This is all cartoon drawings, but you find Marx in there too, and
Crowley,
and Aleister Crowley, the OTO, who worked for MI5 or 6. So someone, the Beatles didn't draw that up, I'm sure. However, when they were over in Canada, there was a Professor O'Driscoll at the University of Toronto who was present when Marshall McLuhan talked to Lennon. And Marshall McLuhan was really into the new age that was coming of electronics and cyberspace and all this kind of stuff. And he told Lennon, he says, "You do know you're being used." And then they had a quiet conversation, and it was after that Lennon sort of changed.
Any reason why you think he might have been hit by a Manchurian Candidate?
There's no doubt with the Manchurian Candidate. It's amazing. And he was also shot outside the very doorway where they filmed Rosemary's Baby. That's no coincidence.
The Dakota has some kind of history, doesn't it?
Yeah, oh yeah. So yeah, I think Lennon still had enough of a following to have been listened to. See, a small person who's unknown could say the most amazing stuff and back it up, but no one would listen because we're trained to follow the stars. So they give us the stars. So when a star talks, we listen. We think they're very important people. We do listen. That's why they recruit them for political campaigns. They might not know any more about politics than your local plumber, but the fact is they're a star, and the public, unfortunately, grovel at stars.
Obviously, that Double Fantasy album that came out, the last one he was to release, was very, very sweet and much different than some of the anger that he had let out, either with the Beatles or in between time. But again, do you think? Well, I guess what I'm driving at is why would you choose to take him out at that particular time? I mean, if he was taken out, there had to be an order. Those who gave it, what did they possibly could have feared from him?
I know that if he had been approached to be knighted, because I can remember when they got the Order of the British Empire many years ago, and they appeared with their top hats and tails, and eventually they gave it all back, or the little medals back. But I know they were going to get knighted. Paul McCartney eventually did, and I think Lennon then would have been speaking out publicly in the newspapers as to why he didn't want it. I think that would have started the ball rolling.
Yeah. Well, real quickly, kind of a foreshadowing of what would take place on a very minor basis. I had a friend when we were all living in New York, and he was working with the Bureau, and he was doing a lot of photographic surveillance of supposed emissaries who were believed to be KGB, okay? He was all over Manhattan.
Yeah.
He happened to see Lennon walking by the car that he was sitting in while they were casing somebody. He gets out of the car, he approaches Lennon from behind and taps him on the shoulder, and he said, "Lennon, like, just jumped 17 feet in the air." And I said to him, "Man, you don't come up to people like that, you know?"
Yeah.
And ironically, what would happen, something like six years later, you know, it would be a back shot that did it. So.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, what I really was astounded at was when I discovered that communism was created by the West, by its supposed opposition. And we're talking about culture creation. I was often asked to sing at different functions, and often I wouldn't know even what they were. I would just arrive there and sing a couple of songs. And there was a place in Toronto in the 80s which was called the Trojan Horse. And I just popped in there, actually, just to see what it was all about. And they asked me up to sing, and I sang a few songs, and then they came up and said, "Well, that's not radical enough." And I said, "What do you mean?" They said, "Well, the government pays us to bring in radical singers here to change society." So they were getting grants from the government to operate this place, to get radicalism going. And this was happening in Britain and all the democratic countries at the same time. They were all over the place in every major city.
I And rock and roll plays a very interesting part in the second half of the 20th century and obviously into the 21st. We're with Alan Watt. The website is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. He does have the Cutting Through series. We did ask him, and he is going to release in time DVDs. Anything else I might have missed on the offerings?
Yeah, there'll be much more coming out, and just to let people know, there's one little thing, because I don't take PayPal, and I think someone's using my name, because PayPal sent me a message today, saying they're cutting my account. I don't have an account with them. So
cutting an account that you don't have.
That's right. So I'd like to warn the people, don't fall for anybody that's out there claiming they're me. I don't take PayPal.
All right. You do instruct people on how you want to be paid. You want to just tell us right now?
Yeah, they use the international, and it's got to be international postal order from your post office. There's no problem getting them. They're easy to get. And just post it to me with your order, and I get it back to you in no time. Yeah.
Right. And we do that with Charles Wilcox and Arthur out of Calgary. However, for folks that are in Canada, what's the relationship there as far as what payment you'll take?
They can do just general postal orders, Canadian postal orders. Yeah.
And can they send fiat currency to you too?
They could if they want to, because it gets through. Yeah.
I find also, I have to tell you, that whatever Wilcox and I send back to each other has a habit of getting opened.
I had 3 letters today. Each one was opened.
Yeah. That's another whole story. What's going on between our two countries?
It's the new freedom.
Oh.
Yeah.
All right. You can get in touch with us if you want to ask a question or make a comment to Alan. You can do that with Hotmail, email, my Hotmail, which is Vyzygoth@hotmail.com, and we have at least, I think, 1 or 2 questions I'm going to pose to you as soon as we come back there, Alan. So it's Vyzygoth@hotmail.com. If you choose to use instant messaging via Yahoo, use BYZ 1400, or MSN, it's just Vyzygoth. Having said that, we do have a question, and I think it may not be in the flow of everything, but it certainly is when we consider culture. It may not be music. These folks had posed this question, said, concerning our contemporary culture, why is there such a huge upsurge in young people getting tattoos? And I would just say body piercing and everything else as well. What about that, Alan?
It's getting them ready for insertion of chips in the body and making it fashionable, trendy. They had discussions at Loyola University about ways of chipping every human. This is the World Science Meetings, sponsored by the U.S. Department of Commerce. And they thought they'd give it snob appeal, because they must make it trendy and almost give it snob appeal. So they're coming out with these designs, and body piercing was a crucial step to accept the piercing of the body for insertion of chips and so on.
I hear the scripture, and I know you feel differently about that. In fact, we got a couple of questions along those lines that I'll bring up to you. But I always felt that you leave the body the way it is. I don't like to paint anything on it or stick anything into it.
Yeah.
And it would make sense that certain taboo has been broken through. And so if people get used to putting things on or in themselves, what big deal is it if the chip goes in as well? Right?
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. It's a conditioning process. Yeah.
Okay. Let's see. I got another one for you. It says, actually, I had asked you if I could ask you about this when we were speaking around 3 o'clock or so.
Yeah.
And here somebody wrote a question anyway. The individual writes, I am very curious how far up the pyramid of power he really knows about, and what is the nature of their religion. So who are the they, and what is their religion?
It's a complicated religion in a sense. I've talked to some people who are up amongst them, and they're above what we would call Freemasonry. They're way higher. They do go through ceremonies where they bring on what they claim are entities into them, which gives them extra power, intellect, definitely longevity, and energy. It also makes things happen for them, to those around them, in their favor. And the first time one of them told me this, I couldn't believe it, because I know the whole ceremony. They described it, And another person on a different side of the country told me exactly the same thing, and he was up there too. And then since then I've had a few of them tell me in other countries, and what they described was a room where high adepts come in, and the candidate, who's already way up beyond masonry, is brought on this square stage with two escorts. A pyramid of brilliant light envelopes them on all sides, and you can see that the two escorts' eyes glow red in this light. That's all you see. And as they're doing their little chant in the audience, there the other adepts, the candidate's eyes blink on red, and that's it, done. And so they've all described the same ceremony to me, and so there's definitely something to this. There's something which gives them the higher cunningness. It's not quite human. We can't deny the diabolical nature of their cunningness and their understanding of human nature. And of course, some of them have also told me that they believe they're descended physically from what some people might call fallen angels, which came here in a spirit form. And because they were closer or more recent from the creation itself, they willed from the matter on earth, they willed their own bodies into existence, and these bodies were perfect, so that the perfect humans or perfect spirit that they had could inhabit them. And then as they integrated with the people who were here, they began to lose all of these special supernatural or psychic abilities, and hence the need to go back to inbreeding again. So for the perfect body, it had to be perfect from that strain, that link, so that the perfect spirit could inhabit it. They do believe in reincarnation, a big time. But it's reincarnation of their own families down into their own families again and again.
Well, Scripture bears out the situation about other world individuals having intercourse with earthly women.
Mm-hmm.
Some say, I guess, that the flood wiped that all out. Some say that it continues on and on.
What's interesting to me, I know that the Old Testament is there's so much allegory and hidden esoteric within there. That's why the Old Testament is present in all the Masonic lodges. That's the rule book for the esoteric nature. But it's interesting that even the few names that they give you of the fallen ones, the ones who interbred with women, each one was a particular specialist in science, a particular science, mathematics or chemistry, etc. So that's of interest to me.
Before we go any further down this line, somebody jumped in late, so we can just kind of do this and move along. The individual said, I just started listening. Were you talking about the Beatles with Alan? Is this an anti-Beatles viewpoint? I've always felt the Beatles were anti-NWO. Just look at John Lennon. Okay, yeah. There's been a lot of speculation he was taken out by a Manchurian candidate, and we discussed that. Lennon might have been rubbed if he was becoming, so to speak, anti-NWO.
Mm-hmm.
But the group itself, whether it knew what it was doing or for whom it was doing it, certainly wasn't. I don't think you would call the Beatles anti-NWO.
No, because even in the album after they came back from the Soviet Union, and they said, and of course they sang the song, "There's going to be a revolution," and they also sung "Back in the USSR, you don't know how lucky you are." And of course the USSR supposedly was set up for globalization and a socialist system worldwide, run by a small elite.
Would you call that a laboratory for the shape of things to come?
Definitely.
All right. And it was a capitalist construct.
Oh, it's funded from the beginning by the banks from the West.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's been well documented by a number of authors to say that, yes, even the revolution, the Bolshevik Revolution, was financed from the West.
It was from the very beginning. In fact, even Canada, where Trotsky was caught in the east coast of Canada on board a ship heading out that way.
Right.
And he had bags full of cash from the New York banks, from Kuhn Loeb and different companies. And a letter came from Wilson, actually it was a telegraph from Wilson asking the Canadian authorities to let him go. And Wilson had and immediately he got a stamped passport sent right up by express for for Trotsky, and they let him go.
Yeah, Trotsky and his family were apprehended by Canadian Navy, were they not?
Yeah, the police got him, and it docked into I think it was Nova Scotia. The dock at Nova Scotia. It docked in there before it continued on, and that's where he was taken off board and put in a cell.
And I believe even the Prime Minister of England also urged that situation to let him go.
Oh yeah, it came from the top.
From Wilson Endon.
And it had to. It was an interesting scurry to get the guy to his destination in a hurry. Yeah.
Going back to that first question from this particular listener who posed a few, but who are they? I mean, first of all, who are we looking at nowadays? I mean, in the United States, I would say it's the characters like Rockefeller, Carnegie, the foundations, and even up by you, Bronfman. Are they not all in this?
They're all in it. However, in their own religion, those that work are not at the top. Anyone who does work of any kind, it's more like a Brahmin type religion than anything, including the order they're setting up, which Charles Galton Darwin said would be a new caste system for the world. And there's no doubt the Rockefellers and these boys are put out there and well funded and protected to do what they do. But they're not the bosses, because at the top they have they call it the lazy boy, and the lazy boy does no work. He might make occasional suggestions or comments, but his helpers must put it into action. They take comments from him and just put it. That way there's no comeback on these people. If someone's rubbed out, for instance, so-and-so is being a nuisance. So the lazy boys at the top are the real bosses. Now who they are very, very old families, very wealthy families, and very quiet families. There was one here that Gorbachev comes up to see in Ontario, and they're called the Llewellyn family, and they helped, I think, start off Merrill Lynch and back them. And they're private bankers, live way out in the country, and I think one of them at one time was Lieutenant Governor for the Queen to represent Canada. So they've been heavily involved in the past with the British Federation, you might say.
On the other, well, would you say that Soros is probably part of it?
Soros is a front man, and lower down on the totem pole, he was picked up by the Rothschilds. Soros has quite a history. And people think it's a Jewish conspiracy, but Soros himself was turning in Jews, being one himself, and that's exactly what the Rothschilds and guys like them wanted, someone who had no conscience and doing what they were doing. And if you take the word Geo, see, Geo, or George, is the world, and the rest of the George, the Rouge, is the red world. That's what that means. George is a Masonic name. And red is their color for their conquering and their advancement of the great work. So Soros comes from a Greek word, which means serpent or snake or dragon. And so these names are actually made up for them. And Soros, he did boast in the British Daily Mail about 10 years ago how he'd phoned two of his friends, and they played the stock market in Britain and deliberately pulled the rug, causing the pound to crash in Britain. They came out with millions of pounds to their profit, and he boasted for half a page on how he and two friends did this. Then the British had to go to the big bankers and borrow more money to get the pound up again. So these guys have immunity to do what they're doing. However, Soros, like Rockefeller, his main job is to accumulate so much money, which he then uses to push non-governmental organizations, which claim to represent various public institutions. And of course, that's how this new system is to be run, is demands by NGOs, demanding laws that the government's only too happily to put in. And that was exactly how the Soviet system ran. It was run by NGOs, although the tops of the NGOs were picked by the Politburo.
Also, it's interesting, too, that George Soros came out with the book The Open Society, which is somewhat reminiscent of Wells' The Open Conspiracy.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, about the religion, Craig Heidbichner wrote a book called OTO Beyond Freemasonry. There's a few individuals out there who claim that Freemasonry will go beyond the 33rd degree in the Scottish Rite and become extremely, extremely occult. Do you sign on along with that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've seen in the mix with a lot of people from the OTO, because most musicians are encouraged at the top to join it. And I've been to parties where priests from the OTO have walked in, and I've seen what goes on there. So yeah, it's highly, highly occultic. Even the members up to the 97th or 96th degree don't know what it's all about, because it was much higher than that. And there are definitely forces at work that can be utilized. Some are natural within people, and they're taught how to use them. Other ones are, you might say, supernatural. Yeah.
Well, when you talked about the red eyes, I had to think back to the book that Van Helsing wrote. Great name, too, huh? About secret societies and their power and influence in the 20th century. And he claimed that there were 99-degree lodges. And I don't know if we said this between ourselves before, but there were 99 of those 99-degree lodges, all presided over by a demon.
Technically, it is. And then even each lodge has sub-ones. This is what they say. This is what they claim. And each candidate gets, as I say, takes one on. And the contract basically is that hell to an entity is absence of the physical world, physical sensation. And if you imagine sort of being a mind way out in space, and you couldn't move, you couldn't feel anything, couldn't hear anything, that is hell to an entity. So heaven is here to them. And when they can come into a body, and the higher the entity, the more time they will take in that person's body. Perfect possession, as they call it, is when the person is at home with the entity, and the entity is at home with them. There's no struggle there whatsoever. So, I've met some of these people who even work in government in Canada, and I've watched them operate with their occultic stuff as they try to either hypnotize people or bring them under their influence or spell, you might say. But I've seen them operate.
Well, one of the questions also I got was, as far as how far back the Illuminati goes, the Bavarian Freemasons are the only reference I can find to them. I guess the question is then, and I'm kind of trying to restructure it, and that is, how far back are there any references to Illuminati? I mean, I hear that it goes back to Mystery Babylon religion.
Yeah, in all ages, you've had the universities. Even the ancient world had universities, and the term even alumni is from illumined. So they've used this all down through the ages. I think the Oxford Dictionary claims that the Illuminati first were mentioned publicly as an occultic group around the 12th and 13th centuries onwards. And so Weishaupt was simply one member of one group popping his head up in one place in history. He wasn't the boss. However, what he did use at that time, he used the term world citizen. And the Rockefeller Center and the Rockefeller Foundation, and I have Rockefeller on tape giving awards for world citizenship. That came from the Illuminati. Yeah.
The whole idea of world government
and world citizenship. Yeah.
All right. Move along. A couple others here. It says, please explain the origins of the belief system of the illumined ones. For lack of a better term, what is their legend? Where do their gods come from?
Well, that really is what we've already covered, that they were different. We're talking about the high ones, not the ones who worked their way up, but the ones who are hereditary. they do claim that they came here from, or were put here. It's often kind of vague there. And they willed matter to create perfect bodies for themselves to inhabit, since they believed they were perfect spirit. And as long as they interbred, that was the whole key to it, was the interbreeding. They would always reproduce the same strains from the same original bodies, so that their spirits could keep re-inhabiting or reincarnating into the same family lineages. And they really believe this stuff. Yeah.
Well, what about the monarchical families that still exist in Europe? I mean, they're in on this whole situation, are they not?
They are. There's no doubt. I mean, even with Prince Charles, he didn't pick his wife. His wife was picked for him. And then who does the picking? Now we know that the Burke's peerage, they do all the genealogies for the rich and the aristocracy. But there's obviously still today a priesthood which arranges the marriages and does all the work. Today they even do DNA samples and everything.
Well, is it true that she was in the line of the Stuarts, which supposedly is the house from which the Windsors wrested the throne?
Yeah, she was. She had some of the Stuart in her, but also it was interesting. I think it was her grandfather was also a banker from New York. So they're all intertwined.
The one thing that dawned on me was the fact that if the Windsors were seen legitimately as illegitimate as far as taking control of the throne, that if they could get themselves an heir of the Stuarts and have children, which would be the two boys, then they're actually back in business again.
Yes, there's no doubt that's what they believe. But even to go further back to Robert the Bruce, which started all this kind of thing, then the Stuart took. The Stuart was the steward, you see. It was a title at one time. And even Robert the Bruce was not a Scotsman. You always find the elite rule over people and they don't belong to the same ethnic origin. And Robert the Bruce was Robert de Brucy. He was a Norman. And it was the Normans who brought these people in with them. And they're a very strange, it's never been explained who these Normans really were, who came in with their vast armies and did campaigns all over Europe, which really, on a financial scale, was over the budget of the Second World War.
Well, the Normans, are they also part Scandinavian?
No, but what they do is they claim that they'd also come from the north of France up to Norway, Sweden, and used that as a jumping point into Britain. But they also came across the Channel, and they took across prefabricated forts that were acres and acres and wide. Massive undertakings, and logistical supplies going way back through Europe, heavily financed, and they brought all these ancient coats of arms. People today will say, well, or genealogists will say, this came up during the Crusades, all this coats of arms, but that's not true at all. They had these coats of arms, or these special families anyway. They brought them with them when they came into England. So
the Normans bear some looking into as far as the size of their operation.
Absolutely, and even where they came from in this way. They used the same techniques as the communists do today. Trotsky wrote a book which was, I think it was in praise of terror, by using the terrorism to get the public to comply. And you'll find the same thing with William the Conqueror, the Norman, who used to grab all the prisoners that were outside the castles or the towns, and the old and the infirm, and he would burn their eyes out, knowing the onlookers were watching from the parapets. He used all the terror techniques as they did in ancient times that the Hamites used. You'll find in ancient records of the Brotherhood of the Hamites, who really looted all over the Middle East. And the Hamites were a brotherhood. They brought in criminals who went through a sort of formal initiation, similar to Masonry, and they did drag off all the useless eaters that they couldn't sell as slaves, and they would cut their hamstrings. That's where cutting the hamstring comes from. So these people, right down to William the Conqueror, were using the same techniques, and it's never been explained how it got from the Middle East, the ancient Middle East, right down to present history. and neither has the inauguration ceremonies of the Queen, which goes back to the days of Nimrod. I mean, here you have a woman sitting on a raised ziggurat-type dais with an ermine coat on, which Nimrod wore. You'll see it in the old stelas that have been found, holding the same type of scepter, etc., with these bishops with their crooks and all that round about them in the same places. Someone knows these formulas, and why is this happening in England even today?
Because nothing ever changes.
Yeah, but they know this. Where do these archives of information exist? Because they're not in public libraries. And yet these people are so stuck on tradition.
Right.
And in the Westminster Abbey, where they do these inaugurations, you have different knights of the Normans again, who are entombed there, and they're laying on their, they have these statues of laying down over their tombs, and in one of them, they've got 6 or 3 tiers of Egyptian obelisks going up the wall, and the checkerboard floor, the tessellated floor on the wall between these obelisks. What's that doing? What's this Egyptian stuff doing from the 13th century? What's it doing in England? In Westminster Abbey?
But do you believe that's an extension of the Templars' involvement in all this?
I think it's even pre-Templar.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, can we do this? I'm not going to keep you much longer, but if we could take a break just now, a couple of minutes, and we'll come back and I'll finish off these questions. Are you all right with
Sure, I'm fine, yeah.
All right, we're listening, you're listening to The Grassy Knoll. We have with us Alan Watt. We're just going to take a couple of seconds, and we're going to come right back and finish up these questions. We thank you, Alan, for being as gracious as you are to see this out. We'll give you some more information about Alan and some of the work that he's done. Also, when this time you get a chance and you're on the internet, and I'm sure you are if you're listening live, and that is go to cuttingthroughthematrix.com and take a look. All right, we'll be back in a couple of seconds. Thank you. A bit more time. And again, Alan Watt has been good enough to stay with us a couple of minutes longer because we have a couple of questions that people did pose throughout the week, and we'd like to get to them if we can. The website is Cutting Through the Matrix. The series that he wrote, a 3-volume series, is the Cutting Through series. He's coming out with more DVDs. And would you say, Alan, in general, that for the most part, people should just stay tuned?
I'd say so. I'd say so because I'm going to try to explain why, since the 60s especially, you've seen the fulfillment of theosophy, and you've seen it come into fruition, the whole movement towards a new age, which was planned long ago, and the mixing of the religions together, especially Hinduism, coupled with channeling. It's interesting to see that everything promotes channeling today. Even psychologists, a lot of psychologists promote it. Past lives, find out who you are, channel, and bring in an entity and find out who you are. This is almost as though there's an awful lot of entities waiting to occupy bodies right now. And it's been promoted from the top down now, and why not before? So that's an interesting phenomena to see, because as I say, nothing happens in the system unless it's promoted from the top. They never allow anything to come out of the grassroots, which might upset and have a ripple effect and knock everything haywire. So people should stop and think before they fall into all of these traps that are laid out for them, and which will shape their minds exactly as the planners intended it happen and them to be. So you got to start thinking for yourself.
Are you thinking that there's a certain proximity to some kind of cataclysm?
Not so much a cataclysm as the end of many, many thousands of years of planning. The great work they claim, and even rabbis will claim this, that it began around 4,500 BC. They all had the same stories of something coming or something being born. The Greeks talked about the light falling from the sky, a meteor, that type of thing. They used these allegories to describe the plan being born on earth to the great work, which was the perfection of not just the world, but everything in it, which they claimed was left imperfect by the Creator. So the job was for all of the elite, and through science especially, to reshape everything by understanding nature, breaking it down to its tiny atoms, etc., and restructuring it in a more efficient fashion, but especially man himself. They want to create a whole new type of humanity, and that's why the rush has been on for so long for genetic engineering.
I heard you use the word diabolic before, and then a couple with what another person has asked of you, and it said, I hear Alan speak of the Bible as complete fiction, but then he has made references to the Bible and or Jesus as factual too. And like I said, you use the word diabolic, that could be looking at, and now it has a very secular meaning.
Yeah.
But do you believe? Well, let me just straight out ask you: do you believe in Satan?
I believe in that there's definitely evil, and I would love as an individual to put everything down to hidden sciences, advanced sciences. I know there are innate powers within people and psychic abilities. However, it's beyond that, because I've seen people which you would call possessed, and you have no other word for it. It's the only word we have. It's like diabolical. We don't have any other words in the English language to explain or describe the evil here. But I've had people come up to me and talk to me. I could even go further than say coming up to me, but address me as a demon.
You?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Directly. And I was with a guy from a very big rock group. We'd gone to a very small party, and it was towards the end of the night. There was only a few people there. Most of them were falling asleep wherever they could. And the woman, I won't say who it was, but she was up there too. She floated down the stairs. I mean floated. And I'd taken no drugs. I didn't think anybody had slipped anything in the drink I was drinking. And she floated down these wide stairs right up to me, and she came within a few inches of my face. Her eyes rolled up and were pure red. And she says, you're a very powerful person. We could do amazing things together. And I tried to keep very calm, and I just said, I don't think so, at least not tonight. So she turned around. She got this weird grin on her face and turned around and floated all the way back. Then the guy who was with me, I thought he'd fallen asleep. And he came over and he says, Alan, he says, tell me I was dreaming, but I saw this woman float down the stairs. I said, well, you did. So he said, I'm glad you did, or I'd be worried about myself. But I've had a lot of this kind of things happen to me throughout my life. I've also seen people, especially when I'm trying to put the word out to people what I know, I've seen people being taken over in just around me, in fact, and do incredible things. So I can't deny. I could always try to say, well, maybe they're using some strange form of science, which they certainly do have, to get into people's minds and make them behave this way. But I don't think it's all that at all, because you feel the presence of these people arriving before they come to the door. You feel them tangibly coming. And when one comes to your door that you've seen before as the person, and hears a person talking with a different voice, saying the most amazing things to you, and you felt it long before they came to the door, you know the presence is there, so I can't deny it, I've also seen some of the big rock groups at parties when some of the high priests have come in, and there's a lot of occultic stuff that they definitely deal with, which works. It's real. It's definitely real, yeah.
Well, but you don't necessarily believe that we're headed toward the scenario that's laid out in Revelation and otherwhere?
Not in that sense. I could always read it in a different way, of course. But I know that the usual plagues, famines, warfare, earthquakes type of scenario, that's been used all down through the ages by the rulers to keep us all obedient and scared, terrorized, you might say. So I'm not too sure they could do all that again quite easily. In fact, they can through basic science itself. However, it's odd that even in the New Testament, especially in the Revelations, and in Paul as well, you have this new being created.
All right, hold on, Alan. I don't know, for some reason you dropped out. All right, hold on. Just say hello to me.
Hello. How are you?
All right, we're back.
Okay.
Bottomed out and it came back up again. Just continue with where you were going.
Yeah, I think it's odd. You see, Revelations is written in the typical mystery religion, the language that they use. It was not written by any followers. It was written by the mystic religion itself. It has all the earmarks of it. And they said that you'd be changed in the blink of an eye.
Yep.
And when I was listening to the Loyola World Science meeting to do with the brain chip, which was held in the U.S. in the university, when the man said, the scientist from Tokyo said, this will be the end of individuality as we know it. He said, when everyone has this, it'll be more like the beehive. It will be impossible for a person to even perceive of themselves as a distinct individual. And that's what flashed through my mind. I said, I thought, the blink of an eye. When the main switch is thrown, once everyone's got it, you know. So this is a plan. It's a plan. It's not from any creator. It's a plan, all right, but it's not the creator's plan, I'm sure.
Oh, no, I'd say it was the anti-creator.
Yeah.
But a couple of emails that we got a while ago that addressed certain, I guess, occultists, and I think you'll remember an individual wrote about, I think his name was Ebola. I've checked it out, and they're mystics, and there's another one by the name of Gwenon. Does it ring a bell at all?
No, I know there's hundreds and hundreds of them. There are probably thousands, actually.
Well, the reason why this person wrote about this, and he's on the coast, I should say, whoever it is on the coast, and felt that there was a rise in what I guess at least Gwenon might have been in, and that is Sufism.
Yeah.
Now, he said, I don't really have, again, I don't know who it is, I sex him as a male, but the individual wrote, I don't, I guess it's Charlie, that would be a male, wouldn't it? So Charlie writes, I don't have any data for it, he said, but I perceive out here that there seems to be a bit of a rise in that, for radical Islam. If so, and here's a situation that we all know has happened through the centuries. Does it seem to you, though, as if we're all being prepared for some kind of holy war, once again, between, crusade-like, but you can hear, Bush use every so often, between Christendom, no matter how debauched it is, and Islam?
Oh, it's on. There's no doubt this is a crusade for sure. It's the final crusade. This is to standardize the world, and everyone must be brought under the same system of what they call democracy or elite-driven socialism. The Muslims just don't fit in. They don't have central banks in some of these countries. They're not on the world banking system especially. They're not on the UNESCO program except the ones America's taken over already. So UNESCO was created to give a common culture to youngsters the world over.
The school systems, is it not?
Yes, and that's the first thing they set up in Iraq when they moved in. UNESCO was the first one in. After the central bank was put up.
Well, you might also remember when Bush was looking for the imprimatur of the UN, when he gave that speech, not in any kind of pomp and circumstances. He just mentioned we're going to go back into UNESCO.
Yep.
Ronnie had kicked out, and I had to laugh because it's like there's the quid pro quo.
I know that it's essential for them to create a world culture. Brzezinski wrote about it in the Grand Chessboard, and they must bring a common culture world, basically based on the United States to an extent, but it's a different United States. It's the United States which will come out of it just as changed as the country they've taken over.
Well, Charlotte Elizabeth writes about that situation where a lot of the plans for education are mutually held by both Russia or or back when the Soviet Union, and the United States. I mean, USA, USSR, whatever, you know. But it's going to be a global education, and you can see this through the international baccalaureate programs down here in the States. Also with this whole idea of the world education community. So, we're all going to be trained the same way in years to come. Yeah,
we'll have the same opinions, the same thoughts.
And if you're a bad boy, then you're going to have to get reindoctrinated and spend your time at the computer and take the test, aren't you not?
That's it. Until they do chip us all, and then we won't have to. They won't have to worry about us being individuals. We'll be programmed. In fact, at the Loyola meeting, they said that regionalized computers would literally operate the public within a certain radius for jobs. So you won't be able to think for yourself. You will not be you anymore. You'll be a machine.
Well, okay, so you're almost coming to a point where it is true about Borg.
Oh, Borg is the original bee. I mean, this is the Masonic coding, you know, and that's why they gave it the name the Borg. And the beehive has been high in Masonry ever since. That's why they used it at the Loyola meeting. But the Borg is B-Org, original bee. It's the bee that they want to create for the hive. And it's no mistake on the Star Trek series. The Borg ship was called the Hive, and it was a square cube. It was a cube, which is the ashlar, the perfect squared stone of Freemasonry, the perfect society.
And of course, it's pretty well known that whole series, the first one ever, Star Trek, was born out of a Mason, Roddenberry.
It's the red berry. I mean, even his name is the red berry, you know, Rodin, from the Greek. So is a red berry, and its gene, the gene of the red berry, is quite telling. But he was also a member of NASA, and he went to the main meetings, and this is called predictive programming. And his job was to take where NASA was going to take the public. And NASA's job isn't just traveling in space; it's primarily satellites, which will monitor and eventually control all of us. That's their real job. So he was told to write stories around that to change the culture of the public. And the Star Trek series was the federation of a council of 12, the Kabbalistic Council of 12, and travel through space and bring everybody into a free galactic free trade. And those nations or planets which wouldn't join them were bad guys, always nasty guys. And the ones who did join were always nice and pleasant. And so they were, and of course all the aliens were really multiculturalism and how they could all get on together if they really tried. So this was how they programmed the children for what's coming on Earth.
Well, two things that are really interesting. One, of course, the very first, the pilot show for Star Trek involved the court-martial, what was it, Captain Pike? And Pike is obviously not a coincidence.
Oh, no.
And secondly, I got to tell you, I saw a newsreel, we talked about this, probably 2 years ago, but there's a newsreel about the beginning of the United Nations and how the Rockefellers granted land on the east side of Manhattan for it. Well, when they're playing the backdrop music, I kid you not, and I really should send it to you so you could hear this for yourself. The strains of the music back in that 1948 or 49 newsreel, underneath this whole segment about the creation of the United Nations, is exactly the strains from Roddenberry's Star Trek theme. Now, of course, he's credited with writing that music, so I can only assume that either he borrowed but I mean, believe me, when you hear it, there's no doubt. You can see the whole thing, you know, with the ship, you know, Man's Last Frontier, and it's amazing.
And even the name Enterprise is from the blesses on this Enterprise. It's the same thing.
Now, where did you say this meeting was? At what Loyola University?
I think it's in Louisiana.
Oh, the one down in New Orleans?
I believe so.
Okay.
And that's where they held. They've had two so far on the same topic. And it's to do with, they had all the top geneticists involved and guys from the microchip companies. They were all there too, and scientists of all kinds. And Newt Gingrich he kicked off the meeting. He was chosen to kick it off. And the U.S. Department of Commerce paid for it. They put out 600 pages on this. They said that they would promote this chip as a positive thing through cartoons, novels, movies, and so on. To make it a positive thing to go for,
Well, I got got to ask you this. It does dovetail into this next question, and we only have two after that. And thank you again for spending some time over the hour. Loyola, obviously Jesuitical, true?
Yeah.
All right, Jesuits, Vatican, Freemasonry.
In this day and age, in fact, in all days and ages, you could never keep separate secret societies apart from each other. They'd infiltrate each other, and long ago they all became one. Just like the United Nations, UN is in French, one. That's what it means. So they've all been one main system of control for hundreds of years.
Well, this person wanted to know what about the conflict between the Roman Catholic Church, I would say the Vatican, I wouldn't even say the RC Church, but perhaps and Freemasonry. That thing, if there ever was a problem, that problem doesn't exist any longer, does it?
I think at the high levels of the Vatican, it's never been a problem because Pythagoras, who came out of Egypt to start his form of indoctrination of the youth into the revolutionary system, used the same color coding as the Vatican. The guy at the top was white. Then you had the cardinals with the red and black and so on. It's the same color coding system right down through the Vatican to the guy in the bottom who deals with the profane who are in the dark, so that the priest at the bottom wears black. With a little slit in front of his throat, so that he doesn't give you all the truth. He's not permitted to. That's why the collar is black most of the way around his head, except for the bit at the front. This is all Pythagorean. That goes back long, long before the creation of the Vatican. Now, it's possible you can have a pope who doesn't know if he's picked from the bottom and thrown right up there. But the guys, the curia, they certainly know the mysteries, and I think they always did.
And what about the Jesuits, who obviously were a military order, not necessarily a spiritual order, and who call their head a general?
Yeah.
Do you see them as being players in this global stage?
They are. They were much bigger players than they are today, because now you'll find the same system of masonry. You might call it masonry. It's a loose term. But really is all the same thing. It's really at the head of the CIA, the Mossad, the MI6. In fact, you have to be one to get up there now. And that was written about by a guy in it. He called it Spy Catcher. He joined, and he was told he had to join the Freemasonry to be accepted in MI5 and 6. That was White, his name was. Yeah.
Do you understand through, I guess it is, Operation Paperclip, is it your understanding, I should say, that the Vatican did secrete out a number of high-ranking Nazis?
Oh, yeah. And I think the public should realize this, too. We've got to stop playing the ethnic and religious game, because this is Nazism was not just a national thing. It was a philosophy. And anyone could join it as long as you believed and gave your oath to that philosophy. And at the top of that philosophy, which wasn't to end with Germany, it was to travel on.
And didn't they export it here, though?
Oh, they did. In fact, I think one of the main teachers that taught at was at Michigan University, came from there. He was given the orders to go and teach it in America, and he's taught some of your present big boys up there in the government, the federal government, and he was a Jew. And I think it's time that Jewish people realized that there were also Jewish Nazis here who belonged to this other brotherhood. And that's the key to it. When you join this brotherhood, you give up your ethnic origins and your family origins, and your new brother is a member of the order worldwide, whoever he may be.
Well, I won't go down this road, but this is what makes me at least believe that it is true, that many of the Zionists who may have Jewish surnames or whatever could not care less about Jewry.
They couldn't. In fact, it was interesting in the Star Trek series that they used a Talmudic quote quite often by Mr. Spock, who was a Vulcan, the Volcanos. That's what Vulcan was. He was told that symbolized in the mysteries total logic and power. So Mr. Spock was the Vulcan, and he would often say, "The few must perish for the sake of the many," the sacrifice, and that they don't mind sacrificing people because they don't see them as their own anymore. They belong to a much higher group that's transcended their old religion.
that transcends religions and statehoods and everything.
Yeah.
And here we go to the last two questions, and that is the Star of David, this listener writes, and the, quote, square and compass, unquote, of Freemasonry form the same shape. I imagine this is not a coincidence, since the Star of David is also seen in Masonic symbolism. What is the meaning of that symbol? And would you not say, I mean, I've heard rabbis say that, honestly, they always thought on the Israeli flag there should be a menorah. Well, there's not. So it's like, you want to speak to the Star of David and its Masonic implications?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's you'll find it in ancient inscriptions in India. That's where it came from, originally. And it's above and below. It's male and female. It's the two forces within man itself. Because women, according to the mysteries, they really hate the women. And so the woman is left on one hand, which is sinister by night. They call it sinister. And Dexter is right. In the mysteries, they also use the above, which is heavenly, which is male, and the female, which is earthly, which is below. She's base. They really hate the female, and those women who are following this in the side orders are getting told a lot of nonsense because they're despised at the top. In fact, it's declared they're not efficient enough. Their emotion gets in their way of efficiency, and that's why the new type of creature will be created genetically. So it's the above and below. It's the Trinity above and the Trinity below as well, and there's many different levels of meanings to the different Trinities as you go up the ladder. Yeah.
Also, I think it's interesting that in Pike's book, which he wrote, The Morals and Dogmas, in 1878, you'll see the Star of David there, as well as the evolution of the Tau symbol, which becomes the Iron Cross that both Knights of Malta use, and the Templars used, I guess, and also the Ku Klux Klan, and also the variations of the sun wheel, which became eventually the Nazi symbol. And here he has them in that book back in 1878. It says here, and here's the other thing. I believe there's a chosen body there in Israel, but the government is just as corrupt as ours. So when I look at that Star of David on their flag, I mean, that's just, to me, that is a flag. That obviously there are other entities and who have desires on what's called the Holy Land.
Oh, definitely. The thing is, though, the trick is they got to always use the public to back them. And they've got the Christians backing them. They have many Jews, but not all Jews either, backing them to fulfill the prophecies of Isaiah. And of course so they need this public support through religion, and it's got nothing to do with the think it has. And it's no coincidence that blue is also the UN blue. In the occult, in the higher mysteries, the blue is the light of day, where things, to an extent, are simple and in the open. But I stress the word simple because it's not the depth of understanding, because they also have the Black Lodge at night, and that is where the mysteries are explained, the other side of man, you might say. And so the Blue Lodge is at the bottom. That's where the gullible ones join, and they don't really know what's going on. But there's also the black side of it, so that there's always an equivalent opposite of what you see in any flag, and there's an opposite one to the one for Israel too.
And by the way, I don't know, people, I write for a local newspaper, I do a column, and I got attacked for this, but I'm sorry, I mean, when I take a look at the whole idea of the use of a star on our flag, or whether it's North Korea's, or, whatever, I'm like, why is it a pentagram? I mean, a star doesn't look like a pentagram to me when I look up in the air. So is this a coincidence that they would use a 5-pointed star or a 5-pointed graphic to represent something? I mean, is this...
Not at all. It's not a... It represents the man, the divine, to an extent. That's the same logo you'll see that is supposedly sent off into space with the naked man with his legs apart, his arms out. That's the 5-pointed star as man, the divine. And of course, in their belief system, there's always an opposite force to make things work, to balance things. So if when the star's pointing down, that's the diabolus or the evil, the dark side of man. However, technically, in a sense too, well, I can't go really too far and be too graphic with it because you have to go into the sexual details to explain. But there's far, far more to all of these things than just what I've said here. Yeah.
Well, did you touch upon that in any of the books?
Not yet, but I will, and I'll have to explain this. This, is fairly graphic. Yeah.
All right. And here's a great one. I mean, this is salacious, no doubt. It said, because for something completely different, I heard Alan briefly mention on an earlier show he had been to Jimmy Page's mansion and witnessed an eyes wide shut type of ritual. Can you ask him to elaborate on that?
Well, Jimmy Page bought Aleister Crowley's home up near Loch Ness, and I knew some of the people there, including the guy who did the covers for their albums, Colby Barry. So we went to the party, and it was a pretty standard type party, and
what does that mean, though?
Well, these guys just don't bring little bags there of stuff. They have wheelbarrows come in, and oddly enough, the police stay away because there's Masonic connections, and this is standard too. And they fly in young girls, teenagers, and from fans, you might say, or groupies from all over Europe for the party. So they have their big sort of orgy type scene,
Well,
but he also had the priests coming in too. They look like Jesuits or Mormon priests. You'll see the same ones performing marriages coming in before they put on their robes. They'll be dressed the same way when they perform Wiccan weddings and stuff.
There is a story that Page can never spend a night alone in that place. Is that true or not?
Oh, not really. I mean, the place was supposed to be haunted by an old chief who either he was killed or he killed someone and threw the head along the corridor, and you hear it rumbling at night. But I do know that the house itself was kept original because Crowley had his various pentagrams and stuff on the walls and various occultic symbols, and they hadn't painted it because it had been left unused for years since Crowley, that the locals wouldn't go near the place,
Did Zeppelin ever record there?
I don't know. I played at one studio not too far away. I did a lot of session work as well. And sometimes I used to go in and do whole albums for people, write it, and perform in them if they were too stoned to do it. But I went to one which wasn't so far from Inverness, and that was set up by David Balfe, who wrote a lot of songs himself. I was a 48-track studio he put up, and that was the nearest one that came along. Yeah.
All right, we got one last question, and I'm going to cut it off right here. It said, no, this is a bit off topic, but since Alan has talked about secret society so much, I was wondering if he has done any research into the serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, who claims he was part of a secret society called the Hand of Death.
Not him. I've looked into other ones. I do know that there was another one in the States with a Spanish name. He was tried a few years ago. He gave the usual Satan sign in court, etc., and talked on behalf of Satan. I know that serial killers tend to be well connected with the occult, especially when they've been videotaping murders which are snuff films. There was one in Canada not long ago, a few years, with a male and female, and what was never explained is why videotapes of each one of these murders, they'd found some in a river in Canada tied to a buoy, and a woman eventually came forward to a Professor O'Driscoll in Canada from Hong Kong, saying that these videos were being distributed to very important people across the Far East and Japan as well.
Well, and of course, I'm sure you're aware, John DeCamp wrote the book, The Franklin Cover-Up. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah.
All right, and do you believe that was a pretty accurate account, or do you think there's something a little weird there?
I don't know if it's weird. Generally, there'd be no trails left whatsoever. Things generally never get out into the open to the public unless they wanted to. It is possible. There's a type of spell they like to cast, you might say, like the Jack the Ripper thing in London, which was well done in that movie that came out. with the Johnny Depp from Hell. That came because Scotland Yard did declassify the documents on the murder, and Sir William Gall, who was the chief surgeon to the royal family, they knew he committed the murders in Masonic rituals. He killed each woman in a Masonic ritual and left right down to Mitre Square and to the places where he left the bodies. And that was to also form a type of spell over the public, keep them in terror. They do this kind of thing every so often with serial killers. The word serial comes from Ceres, which is the ancient goddess of Greece. And it was the most bloodiest time as they sacrificed the children and so on to the goddess Ceres. Yeah.
Oh, that's how she was sated with...
yeah, blood.
Like Moloch. And of course, Moloch is connected to that place that the camp realized he was getting information about from Benacci, and that is with the big, the tall oaks and not oaks, but the what was it out there? Redwoods. And realized that in fact it was Bohemian Grove.
Yes.
But you're right. When things get out, you do wonder. I mean, even with Quigley writing so much about Rhodes's crew, other things were not stated, like there is the Pilgrim Society, which nobody ever talks about.
Well, I know. It's fascinating to read and understand. Even when the Puritans came in, these strange Puritans who all became very wealthy families, they came in with massive amounts of money and pretended to have this sort of Christian-type front on them. There's far more to it than that. They came from all over Europe, and they had a lot in common with the Cathars, really, and the Albigensians than you would imagine.
We've done some series with the Informer, who talks about really the whole construct and the fable of the United States being not us, but a certain crew down in the District of Columbia. And what was written in the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, was not necessarily for us, but for them.
It was, right down to the naming of the ships with the Mayflower, because May Day is their big day, their festival, the Maypole, which is all phallic and sexual.
Sure.
And even the Plymouth Rock, Ply means many rocks symbolizing a pyramid. This is all interfaith in a sense, if you think about it.
And May 1, 1776.
Yes.
All right, Alan, listen, I'll talk to you the next 24 hours and forever on, but, thank you for being with us for the extent that you have. Also remember that I have to give you some links that I will do, for your site. I want to thank you so much for coming on, and perhaps, down the road, when you've got a rest from me, that you'll do it again.
It'll be a pleasure to do it,
All right, so it's Alan Watt. The website is cuttingthroughthematrix.com. For now, the 3-volume series, Cutting Through series, and you've got more there, so people should stop in often and see what's going on. Is that right, Alan?
That's right, yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I didn't know if you dropped that. Listen, thanks very much again.
It's a pleasure.
See you down the road, okay?
Okie doke.
Thank you so much.
Bye now.
And good